everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sea Stories. We're now into our third season, sponsored by the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. It's great to be back after 2 months of pounding the seas on our own, trying to make a living. Anyway, we're going to take a nice time tonight talking to Dan Moreland. And Dan Moreland has established the program Picton Castle, and he's also acquired the ship, rigged and made the ship into what it is today, which is a beautiful bark. And without much further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Dan. Hello, Dan. How are you?
How do you do? Good evening. Good evening.
Nice to see you. I'm glad you could join us tonight. This is great.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a treat to do this. I'm very happy to talk about this old plug of ours.
Well, you and I have been chasing each other for over a year to have this conversation. And when I first met you, we were talking about Esty and Irving Johnson and their movie Around Cape Horn. So I'm glad to be back chatting it up with you a little bit.
Good. Well, great.
Well, I'd like to start off, if we could, real quickly, just asking a little bit about excuse me, your background and how you got into this. You grew up in Long Island Sound, is that right?
Well, to some degree. I'll back up in that start off picture with me in a uniform. That's in Den Helder, Holland or Netherlands, and that's standing under the bow of the Seedolf, the former Magellan Binnen, a four-masted bark that was a Cape Horn. And we, in the tall ship events over in Europe, we use uniforms a lot because they like us to use uniforms. But how I got started, well, we'll get into this with the slides, but my father was a Foreign Service officer in the United States Foreign Service. Posted various places, but the first important place for me was Aruba in the 1950s. And that's where sailing schooners were still the means to get around back then. And I would go down to the docks with my nanny, Viola Jack, who was the boss of everything in sight, a wonderful woman. And she'd hold my hand, and I'd be a little kid on the docks, and these schooners were just the coolest thing on earth to me, and these ebony gods of the sea, and they treated me so nicely, and there'd be goats on them, and I'd get a mango to suck on, and I'd be hearing all these stories. They couldn't have been any nicer to me. And I thought, well, this is the life. I think I was 5 or 6. I said, this is it. This is the coolest thing you can do.
Oh, man.
I haven't changed my mind yet.
And that's great. Well, just before we get into a little bit of housekeeping, everyone, we are running a question and answer box, and we also have an open chat. So if you would like to get in there, let's take a moment, if you could, and in the chat box, if you all would just type in where you're watching from, that'll let us know that you can see and hear us. So click on your chat and just tell us where you're coming from and what's up. There you go. So I'll start off here. There we go. All right. There we go. Pretty quiet out there. All right. Dan, I think we're in pretty good shape here, and we're going to keep an eye on it. Again, everybody, when you're ready, just type in, and we will address your questions as we get to them through the entire production. Dan, shall we start your show?
Sure.
Let's do it. Hang on just a second, and we'll get right to it. Here we are. And what are we looking at?
Well, this is the head rig of the Picton Castle. She's probably motoring along on a calm right now, towards the west and the sunset. Looks like we're motoring because I don't think we'd be anchored in the middle of the ocean, although we have anchored in the middle of the ocean or things that look like the middle of the ocean. Yeah. But we're headed west here, and this is just a prelude to the next images, which might as well go with. That's the ship, of course. She's a 284-ton riveted steel bark of enormous strength and vitality, and she's rigged to Germanische Lloyd standards. It's a very conventional rig. When I was rigging her up and designing the rig, I got a lot of questions. Well, you want to add skysails and add, but no, I think it's just weird enough having a normal square rigger. So the goal was to be a conventional square rigger that would not be out of place in the latter day age of sail. And there were a lot of little barks this size that were trading around the world, and the idea is that a mariner from that era would step on board and feel right at home. And I feel like we accomplished that, and the ship has been amazingly seaworthy and strong for us ever since. So,
It was quite a story where she came from and what she was before you fixed her up. We're going
well,
to
she
talk.
was basically her hull is that of a steam trawler, but that is basically just a Brixham trawler. In 1928, the difference between a sailing ship hull and a motor ship hull was indistinguishable. So it wasn't. It was before the advent of heavy diesels, which really push a lot of ship through the water. She could have been rigged as a sailing ship in 1928 if they wanted one, but they didn't. Of course, she was a steam trawler, but she's basically a big Brixham trawler. Nice run, good dead rise, lean entry, a lot of depth, a lot of stability, great angles of heel, an immensely stable and seaworthy vessel. And we can go on and on at length, but single compartment subdivision. And when we follow the rules for the American Coast Guard sail training regulations from the 1987, because there weren't any others to use, but we followed those as a guideline. Although she's not a U.S. Coast Guard inspected ship, except in tall ship events, but I thought it was important to follow a guideline apart from my just general desires to have a seaworthy ship. So we use those.
For sure. Once again, everyone, welcome aboard. We have gone live, and if you do have any questions and answers, please go down to your Q&A, and we do have a chat running. And Dan, I think we're about to get into your beginnings.
Okay, well, here we are in Aruba. This is when I was a kid, and Viola Jack and I, she'd hold me by the little boy by the hand, we'd go down, and it was more than just buying bananas and coffee beans and mangoes and stuff. It was also a communication thing. So she had family all over the West Indies, and it would take hours to, go up and down these schooners, and she'd find someone she knew, and we'd go back with a stock of bananas and big sack of coffee beans. But in the meantime, she checked in all her friends and family in, say, Jamaica, Trinidad, or St. Vincent. But I got to be a little kid on these vessels and play with the goats and treated very nicely. And I just thought this was, other kids went to Cape Canaveral or something. I saw this imprinted on me, and it seems as if even then I said, well, as soon as I can, I'm going to get back to this, which I more or less did. So it's Aruba. And then the next one I think is that would be, I think that's Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the type of vessel was there. That one's covered with goats and a lot of noise, and I don't know. I just thought it was wonderful. Music, smells, sounds. I just thought the whole thing was cool.
Yeah.
The next one is Barbados, I think, which was still very much again, the same era when we would go there. We lived in Aruba, and my family would go to Barbados for a break. And this is the carrionnage in Barbados. And it was still like this almost until into the 60s, even in the 70s, there were still schooners there. It's now sports fishermen. Well, times change, and so did I.
Yeah.
But that's the
really, you told me that's really what made you want to continue your entire life. And
well, it certainly made an impression, and it it's the goose, the baby goose that breaks out of the egg, and whatever the baby goose sees moving becomes imprinted, and I think this was it for me. But much more than just the ships, the vessels, the people, but also everything about it. It's the West Indies imprinted on me as a kid. And
it sure has changed a lot, hasn't it, over the years?
yes and no. Yes, the schooners are gone, but I find that by and large, it's the spirit of the Caribbean is very much there. I still think it's a wonderful place to be and sail, and I'd say in some respects it's improved. We're post-colonial.
Mm-hmm.
The deference has been replaced with equality, and I think I prefer it now in so many ways. You're one of the gang now instead of representative of the ruling class, and that's very pleasant. Yes, I'd like to see it crawling with schooners again, but Caribbean's doing great.
And how do you feel about all the tourists coming down there in their sailboats? The Caribbean has become quite the sailing destination for tourists now.
Parts of it, yeah.
Is it a good thing?
The BVI is packed with bareboats, but the rest of the Caribbean, yeah, there's plenty of boats, but it's I don't think it's inundated. I wouldn't say it's inundated. It's still enough of a challenge that the terribly faint of heart aren't there that much. there's some challenges sailing around. The anchorages are good. There's lots to do. I don't think it's broken by any means. No.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Got a slide, perhaps Nova Scotia?
Well, then moving along, I started out in the West Indies, went to Ecuador, saw the Yankee there as a kid in Salinas, Ecuador. That impressed me too as a little kid. And then we moved to Washington, D.C. because my father was being in the Foreign Service, I had to go there. Got out of the Foreign Service. The family, my mother's family was from Connecticut, and we moved to Norwalk, Connecticut with a family homestead. And we had oyster sloops there. And, you know, it was still, this photograph predates my time by 10 years, but it's a beautiful place to grow up. It's now obscenely expensive and millions of dollars to live where we live, but it was still a working waterfront. People, your next door neighbor could be a doctor, a stockbroker, or a fisherman, or a house builder, or a carpenter, or a lobsterman.
Yeah.
That's changed now. But yeah, so that, I guess, a kid, now I'm a teenager and working in boat yards, and then my friends had a little schooner, and that they let me crew on that. That's coming up, the John Paul Jones.
Yeah.
We sailed around there. So, and then Sea Scouts, Boy Scouts was great. There's some islands off Norwalk called the Sheffield Island. Norwalk Islands are beautiful. And we used to camp out there for weeks on end, and our little small craft smuggled, smashed, and broken. And this is my first schooner, the John Paul Jones, with Art and Dean Montgomery, who they built her. And we'd sail up and down the Sound, and that was a fine schooner to start with, and Mayor's Cup races in New York City. And I remember being in high school, and I wasn't applying to university or college in my senior year, and my friend said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going straight to the Caribbean, going to get on a schooner again," which I more or less did. And I still haven't really changed my MO. So
Yeah, can't say I blame you for that.
it's been all right. So
Now,
that's Paul Jones. But I don't know what's next there.
there's another one coming out. Now, with your family moving a lot, did they move during this time when you're in Connecticut?
No.
Foreign Service, you're pretty stable.
Once we're in Connecticut, we stayed there for that was home. And my father retired from the Foreign Service. So that was good for me as a 12-year-old to have that kind of geographic stability, I think. But it was the 60s, and then high school was done. I didn't even think about applying to university. I got on my first ship, the Maverick, which is a 1935 teak-built British Brixton trawler run by Captain Jack Starfin in the British Virgin Islands and the Eastern Caribbean down to Grenada. And it's very much a people ship, gaff rigged, and his belief was that people came to go sailing and they wanted to have fun in the islands and go sailing. And so that's what he made sure they did. And I was euphemistically called second mate because he had two deckhands, and one was the first mate, one was the second mate. What second mate meant you were the lowest deckhand possible. But we were required to, I got the job because I could handle a small outboard boat. And, but we did, I don't know, every 8-day trips around the Virgin Islands down to Antigua. And he was very much about teaching about the islands. And I learned a lot, not just from sailing, because he did sail the vessel very well, but also about how to introduce people to a different culture. And you would not call him woke by any means, but he was very egalitarian. And I remember one time we're in the Virgin Islands, we're coming into Road Town, and a passenger, lovely folks from Wisconsin, wanted to know what the people did there. And now, of course, you could get all hot and bothered and say, "Well, why you ask such a stupid question?" But what he said was, "Well, there's one's a doctor, some's a nurse, some people work in the post office, some people work in the market." And you just go on, and there's a carpenter, and then there's a cop, and they finally got the idea that people do the same thing as they do anywhere else.
Yeah,
but he didn't have to get into some hyperbolic name calling thing. He just answered the question. What do they do? Well, some work in the market and some work, blah, blah, blah. And that was I thought that was both gentle and strong.
Yeah.
And kind of cool. And I met my first shipwrights. That there was a Reuben Peterson, very funny story there. He was a St. Tomian shipwright. We worked replacing beams and frames on the Maverick, and he shows up later in my life, and that's pretty funny too. Wonderful vessel, but that's just a 76-foot version of Picton Castle. The hull's the same.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, almost identical. This is the schooner Warspite, which is on the $10 bill in Eastern Caribbean currency. She was based in Anguilla, but she came into Tortola a lot, sometimes St. Thomas, and she was and I'm good friends with the family that ran and operated her to this day, the Gums. Sir Emile Gums was one of the early prime ministers of Anguilla, and his son Laurie Gums and his wife Deb Voss, who sailed with us in Picton Castle. They run a Carriacou sloop day sailing out of Anguilla, but this was their family schooner that traded all around the Eastern Caribbean.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we come to a point where we're going to take a little station break here, and let's just drop out for a second. Get over here. Here we go. And this is a pitch to ask you to join us at the American Schooner Association. Founded in 1972, the American Schooner Association is dedicated to the history, preservation, and promotion of the schooner rig. You don't need to be a schooner owner to join the organization, just to be interested in these beautiful boats. As time marches forward, the role that schooners played in the history of our country is fading too. Your membership helps support educational programs and provides a base for preserving these vessels. So, join us. It's inexpensive, important, and we'd love to have you along. We'll see you at amschooner.net. And there we go. Like we said, we'd love to have you part of the American Schooner Association. And we are back with Dan Moreland talking about his vessel and program, Picton Castle. So Dan, it looks like we're switching over here. What are we looking at?
This is a Carriacou sloop being built in the windward side of Carriacou. I was there on the Romance a lot, the Brigantine Romance, and the Maverick as well. And we'd go in our shipyard period in Grenada. But they built these vessels on the island next north, and are still doing it. And I take a busman's holiday and just for fun, sail on these sloops. They carry cargo back and forth between Grenada and Carriacou. It's an overnight sail for them. Has some pretty interesting stories. Because some of them didn't have engines then, even into the 70s. They would work for a few years till they could afford to put an engine in, but they were sailing vessels 50 feet long very commonly. They built some bigger schooners that were trading out of Grenada to Trinidad, up to 90 feet. Quite lovely vessels. If you ever see the film My Island in the Sun with Harry Belafonte, there's a lot of scenes in St. George's Harbor with these type of vessels. Very cool, very neat. So they're still building in windward. It started off as sort of a Scottish heritage group. It's now very West Indian / Scottish, and neat vessels still being built. And there's a wonderful film called Vanishing Sail by Alexis Andrews, which tells the story beautifully through one family. Just cool stuff. Very cool stuff. So I got to do that on my week. The Captain Kimberly and the Romance encouraged this sort of thing, and they'd cut me slack to go, do this because I was interested. In the meantime, in the dry dock in Grenada, St. George's, we'd be caulking and replacing planks and working with West Indian shipwrights, which were they were my mentors, and particularly one Wesley Pilgrim, known as Bones. Without the West Indian shipwrights and some of these, they were mariners, they were shipwrights. A lot of them had gone to sea in big schooners and barkentines. Without their encouragement, I don't think there'd be a Picton Castle. What a great background for you. This, of course, is the Brigantine Romance. She was Danish built in 1936 as a galleass, acquired for MGM, I think it's MGM, by Alan Villiers for the movie Hawaii, and he was asked to rig her up. He did that with this and another vessel. This one he did personally, or more personally. And she, her foremast is in fact down to a millimeter, the mizzen mast out of the Joseph Conrad. I mean, he used the same blueprints, and I found that out by looking. But Captain Kimberly was age of sail master mariner. He trained in the, as he was an ordinary seaman in the Abraham Rydberg, a four-masted Swedish bark, and he never wrote a book. Too bad, but I asked him many times, what it was like. Well, just read The Last Grain Race by Eric Newby. It's the same story. But this is the Romance, a beautiful ship, sailed quite well, and I was in her for 4 years. We sailed all over the Caribbean, including Central America, South America, Panama, Bahamas, Florida, as well as our 8-day trips in the Virgin Islands. And then they asked me to be the mate on their first round the world voyage. He'd been captain of the Yankee on a round the world voyage after Irving Captain Johnson, but before she got wrecked, he was not the guy that wrecked it. It's a different fellow. He was a rigger, he was a sailmaker, and he was an extremely hard worker and a big influence. There would be no Picton Castle without him, for that matter.
That's great.
That's her. The next slide shows his ship that he was. That's the Abraham Rydberg, a 2,000-ton Swedish four-masted bark. He also was an American coasting schooners on the coast of Maine before World War II. Then during World War II, he was a mate in tankers and convoys and managed to survive that. And then in the 1940s, he got back into cargo schooners in the Mediterranean. Sea History has done some nice stories on him that tell the story quite fully, but he was a big influence.
Yeah, we were talking earlier. We were talking earlier about the men and the captains who influenced you. This is a great time to segue into that and
sure
take a look at these ships.
Yeah, well, he was a critical factor. Captain Jack Carstarphan, got me sailing. Here's how you got to sail a ship, and how this is about people and places. And then Captain Kimberly and the Romance is more about the ship and the sea. And that's where I got my beginning rigging and sail making in. And we got dismasted in Singapore. We got ran by another ship, and I often get asked, how did I learn rigging? Well, I was in 2 dismastings, and the captains were good at what they did, so we learned from them. I don't recommend that as a teaching tool, but it was effective. We weren't entirely dismasted, but we got rammed in anchorage in Singapore and took down the foremast, so we had to do that up, which we did. But yeah,
I can't even imagine it.
But he was a master rigger. He'd been a rigger at Mystic Seaport for a while, but he had worked with a lot of Swedish riggers. He was very good at that, and he's also a student of the craft to an amazing depth. He knew not just how you do it on a Swedish four-masted bark, but he could tell you how to do it in a 5-masted American schooner and so forth and so on. Hell of a guy. This is the Romance out in the deep in the South Pacific. A lovely image of a little brigantine. And our voyage was almost 2 years long. Spent most of a year in the South Pacific in the mid-1970s. And now that's changed a lot. Caribbean less so. South Pacific, but there's still a lot of South Pacific to see. It's still an amazing place to go. I would encourage anyone to do it. But the South Pacific is a very different logistically. It's a lot more challenging. The anchorages are nowhere near as good. The passages are really long. The weather is not as consistent, so it's tougher seagoing than the Caribbean.
Yeah, I see that.
And then the Denmark had come into St. Thomas every year, and I'd gotten off the Romance 4 years. When you're 23 at that point, it's a long time. That was my university, and I got a chance. I got called up one night. I'd been lobster fishing for a winter just to clear my brain. Do whatever it is you do when you're ashore. And I got a call they needed a mate of the brigantine Phoenix in Copenhagen tomorrow. Someone knew about me. I have no idea why. I don't know how that came about. I said, well, how about day after tomorrow? That seemed to work. So I signed on this brigantine Phoenix, and we sailed from Denmark to what was then Leningrad and back throughout. And that was quite an interesting trip. Leningrad, or St. Petersburg, they call it now, was quite an interesting spot. And the sailing was different. And I was used to tropical sailing. If you wanted to cool off, you throw a bucket of water over your head. If you wanted to shower, you do the same thing. You don't do that in the Baltic. It'll freeze your head. It'll break your skull. It'll crack. So, but I had a wonderful time. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Russia, or Soviet Union, as I say, Estonia, Gotland, and it was an amazing voyage. And then when I signed off, I was in Copenhagen, and I was staying with some Danish friends that I'd known from Connecticut. And I said, I want to get on the Denmark. And she just happened to be in port. And so I think she's the next slide. She's an 800-ton full rig ship. She used to come to St. Thomas every year, and I was just drooled over her. What a fantastic vessel. The Royal Danish State Training Ship Denmark, which means dumb American kids not getting on there. But you don't ask, you don't get. So my friend John Anderson, well, let's just go and ask. And so we went up to the office, and they spoke English fairly well. I spoke not a word of Danish. That had to change. But I said I wanted to talk to someone about getting into Denmark. So they got me Jens Møller, who was the personnel manager. And I said, I'd love to. I've got certain skill sets. I've got some skills I thought, minimal, but I thought, well, Maid of the Romance was not nothing. And I could sew canvas, and I could do rigging and whatnot. And I mentioned that, and I said, geez, I'd love to get a job on your ship, which is a very naive thing to ask. Of course, they're not going to hire me. That's ridiculous. But what he said was, we have all our professional positions filled. That's not no. I did not hear no. I heard, there's a corner I have to go around. He says, well, how about you don't pay me? How about a non-professional position? Well, they did have a couple of slots that they could, I had to go down and talk to the captain. Well, I show up to the gangway. She's over in Holman, the Navy base there. And the captain is Otto Benson, and he's a seriously old school captain. He'd had 3 ships sunk. He'd been in the square riggers in the 1930s. This is 1977. He was getting towards retirement. And he said, first of all, you don't speak any Danish. And then he answered it himself, not one word. Of course, I didn't speak one word. But I think he saw in me, a young guy with stars in his eyes that loved the ship. Because he gets a lot of cadets that don't love the ship. It's drudgery, it's hard work, and they're not interested. They just have to get through it for their training. So he took me. Much to my, well, I actually wasn't surprised. Later, 30 years later, I found out it was actually pretty controversial in Denmark, and they didn't have to take me at all, but they did. And then within 6 months, they had a professional job opened up, and I got that one. And I do it in bosun school. Sometimes proximity really helps. It wasn't because of any outstanding, amazing skills I could have had to offer. I mean, obviously some, and then I was there for the next 4 years. I remember my first day there. We're leaving from, I don't speak any Danish at all, and the third mate asked me if I can steer, and I said, yeah, I can steer. Well, I guess I can steer, but I never steered something like this. But anyway, yeah, we'll go take the wheel. I was on the wheel for 4 hours as we steamed and set sail out of there, bound for Oslo. Oh, wow, this is pretty cool. And just let me steer. Now, there was a mate on the bridge. I wasn't conning the ship. I was just steering. But 4 hours seemed like a long trick at the wheel, but I thought it was great. So I'll stay right here. I'll stay till midnight. And we developed a great relationship. I still have that great relationship, and was the bosun of the ship. And I felt very proud of that, and I still do, as you can tell. Yeah. So this is a 1930s picture. This is a more recent one. Same ship. She's going strong. She took 120 cadets and 19 officers. Now she's 80 cadets and 19 officers. They shortened it up a little bit and she's still a fantastic training ship for the Danish Merchant Marine. And the other one they have is the Geostea, George Stage, or the one that replaced the Joseph Conrad, equally excellent ship. They have the 2 best vocational training ships in the world are Danish. So
totally love that. Yeah, I think we're taking one more moment for another station ident, and then we will be back again with Dan Moreland and more about Picton Castle.
It's a 127-mile overnight race from Annapolis, Maryland to Norfolk, Virginia. It's a celebration of a race to market from an age that has passed into history, a time when the Chesapeake Bay hosted passenger steamers and was peppered with working boats and pleasure craft, all under sail. This is an invitation to take part in a celebration, an invitation to get out on the bay, strut your stuff, spend time with friends, and put some wind in the sails of your beautiful boat. This is an invitation to join the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. After more than 35 years, the Schooner Race has decided to add an invitational class for non-schooner boats that would like to join us in the fun. Now, whether you have a schooner or classic vessel that harkens back to that age of sail, we're inviting you to join us. This race runs the length of the bay, and participants encounter all sorts of different conditions. It's challenging, and it's a great deal of fun. From the parade of sail in Baltimore's Inner Harbor to the crack of the starting cannon off Annapolis to the early morning finish at Thimble Shoal Light at the mouth of Hampton Roads, this is a race designed to celebrate your rig, whether classic yawl, ketch, sloop, workboat, or schooner. It's a chance to test your skills and enjoy the camaraderie of new friends and old. It's a chance to be part of something big and something meaningful. As an invitational class, the criteria are simple. If you have a vessel, modern or not, which is reminiscent of the age of schooners, you are welcome to join us. In addition, if you or your organization have a mission compatible with ours, promoting awareness of the Chesapeake Bay's heritage and ecology, and or preserving these historic vessels, you'd be welcome to join us too. Applications will be considered by our race committee, and if they feel that your boat or organization would fit our parameters, you're in for a wonderful experience. Join us. Let's get your boat on the line. Or if you know of anyone else who might fit our criteria, send this over to them. Let's keep this great event alive, and let's give back to those who live along our shores. Join us for the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. It's a ride to remember. To find out more about the race and our mission of supporting not-for-profit organizations on and around the Bay, please visit us at gcbsr.org.
Life is good, yeah. Life is good, yeah. Yeah, in my darkest times, you got me feeling like I've been walking on air. Left all my worries and cares. I've got no burdens around you. I don't care who knows I love you. 'Cause I've been so lost without you. And in my darkest times, you got me feeling like
And there we go. We are back. Another amazing production from Duncan Hood Studios. Hey,
Yeah.
it's Dan Moreland. He's going to tell us all about his program with Picton Castle.
We get
And thank you, Dan. Let's get back to it.
Okay, the Denmark would make, she's a vocational training ship for the Danish Merchant Marine, and we would make one circuit of the Atlantic every year. And so it was about two transatlantics. Any voyage was 2 transatlantics. Not many ports, mostly sea time, occasional tall ship events, a lot of some protocol stuff, but it was about the ship and the sea. But that's the Denmark. I love every minute of it there. And it's still going strong. I'm very pleased to say that. We get a lot of crew on Picton Castle from the Denmark as well, not surprisingly. But let's move on to the next slide, I think. I got off to Denmark. My father was ill, and my first restoration was one of those Norwalk oyster boats. This was the Hope, 1948. That was an interesting project for me, and it was the beginning of historic preservation in this. And so I got to do that for the Norwalk Seaport Association. She's still around. I think she's back in the private sector now, but she was a neat job, fun to do. Let's move on.
Now, here's
Let's
one we
also-
don't know.
Sorry, I was skipper the first Pride to Baltimore for half a year thereabouts. Took her from Baltimore to Bermuda to the West Indies and throughout the eastern, well, not throughout, but got down as far as Barbados and Bequia, and this is the same one Pete Boudreau helped build and was skipper of it for a long time, and she was quite an instructive vessel, pretty wild. They talk about, my friend Andy Davis talks about it's like riding a wild mare through the night, and that's pretty accurate. And I was a young this is my first command. I was 25. I managed to not lose her, and that's actually more to it than it sounds. It's not me being glib, but she was quite a remarkable vessel. And a very interesting first command and instructive and meaningful. But that was the Pride of Baltimore one. She, let me see, is about 6.5 years later, she was sunk with a loss of 4 hands.
Yeah, off of France.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's an old friend.
Yeah, and then I was staying with my family and helping out there, and there was at the Newark Oyster Festival. I was just walking around, and there was a booth about the Ernestina. Now, I'd seen this old schooner in the Cape Verde Islands in 1978, and she was pretty far gone, but she was afloat. And what I learned from this booth was that she'd been rebuilt, restored somehow, and sailed and given back to the United States as a gift from the small island republic of Cape Verde. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And that resonated with me from a lot of points. One, my parents got married in Senegal, Dakar, Senegal, and they had a lot of affinity for that part of the world. They lived there many years. And he actually knew the Ernestina as well as the other Cape Verdean packets. Cape Verde Islands had, a lot of very interesting ships. And it's one of the few immigrant societies where they were in charge of their own immigration. The ships were owned and operated by Cape Verdeans. This is one of them, and one of the last ones, actually. And she's pretty far gone in 78, but she'd gotten rebuilt with a lot of money from the Cape Verdean government, some help from the States, and she'd been delivered in 1982 by Captain Marcos Lopes with a somewhat shortened rig. And so I wrote a letter to whoever was involved and saying, look, I'm a mariner, and by then I had my Master Mariner certificate, and I'm pretty familiar with wooden boats and education, and so if you guys need any help, I'd be happy to pitch in. I got a suspiciously quick response, and I went to some meetings, and then I finally went up, and the schooner was laying Gloucester, and she looked like hell. She was rough as can be through neglect, but she was strong. She wasn't rotten. The Cape Verdeans had done a solid job on the hull, but she was like 1/3 done with respect to what you need for a finished vessel. So I signed on with that. Again, stars in the eyes, and damn the torpedoes full speed ahead. And we sailed around with that rig, no engine, up and down the coast between New York and Boston, which was interesting. Again, no engine and no insurance for that matter. Good crew, and we did some interesting time, but that revitalized interest. She'd been laying in Gloucester for a year. She had arrived in the States without actually a plan. They'd gotten the boat. Okay, that's great, but now what? So, and that's been instructive to me. What is your goal? If the goal was to get her there, they succeeded. If the goal was to make an operational sailing ship, she wasn't there yet. So this was a fascinating. I was given a great deal of latitude to do anything with any money I could raise. And so it was a pretty open mandate because no one was doing anything. And we got some money together with supporters in the State House, and Tom Lopes and John Bullard and others were involved with that, Biff McLean, and a lot of wonderful folks in New Bedford, and got some funding together, and we got our, we can see the next picture.
Yeah, now you were about 28 here?
Yeah, 28, 29, I guess, 20. Yeah, no, I was 29, and that was because the goal was to do something that was meaningful. Keep the hull, keep all, don't try to make a snapshot in history. So we resulted with my board, which was a very good one, the commission. So how do we restore this vessel? Because she did a lot of changes over the years.
Mm-hmm.
We realized she didn't really do that many changes that were strategic, more tactical. We weren't going to make a monument to expediency. In other words, Bob Bartlett was a brutal. So famous story: fishing schooner out of Gloucester, fishing schooner out of Nova Scotia. 20 years as an Arctic exploration vessel with Captain Bob Bartlett in the United States Navy during World War II, serving Arctic air bases in Greenland. And then she became a yacht briefly. The yacht owners didn't like it that much, brought her back. She was going to go to Tahiti, and she would have been lost there. And then Captain Enrique Mendez bought her and traded in her for 20 years, and she changed a few hands. But she's the strongest boat I ever owned, is how he put it. So she had this rich history. And so what we decided on, let's restore her physically as designed, but don't make a snapshot of, if there's some beautiful African wood that's doing, just leave it. We're not trying to pretend it's 1894. This ship's history is her whole history. And her name is Ernestina, not F.E. Morrissey, because the name Ernestina includes the history of the F.E. Morrissey. There was some thought of changing her name back, but the name F.E. Morrissey does not include the name Ernestina. So we keep Ernestina and want to respect and amplify and celebrate and elevate her Cape Verdean connection. And that was the most amazing experience a young guy like me could ever have. Had lots of help and support and guidance on every level, and we had an incredibly good time. We had in the Cape Verdean community in New England, and that's a book in itself. And we had a grand time. And the next picture shows what we ended up with. And she was a magnificent vessel, and she sailed like a witch, not as fast as Blue Nose or others, but we walked past Shenandoah one day, going dead downwind. Sailed to Newfoundland twice, sailed to the Great Lakes once or twice, all over New England. And the only place we didn't get to, we tried to get to all our original home ports, and the only one we hadn't gotten to was the Cape Verde Islands. And I hope she goes there someday. They've rebuilt her. She's called Ernestina Morrissey now, beautiful vessel, and I hope someday she does go back to Cape Verde. She used to be on the Money there not long ago, and by an engraving taken off a photograph made by Jan Miles off Portland. And so it's a full circle. So I hope she goes back to Cape Verde sometimes. Amazing seagoing vessel. I never let me down. Strong, sail well, powerful, but she's not a toy. You know, she's a big schooner and with big gear. She's not a baby schooner. She's big. So big and powerful.
And what a great background for getting prepped for Picton Castle.
Well, it was and is. And I was skipper on Alyssa. I was mate and skipper on Alyssa a few times. But yeah, the Ernestina was a big, because it was a big project. We had to do everything. And when we were 6 weeks, we were 6 weeks before we were supposed to be in New York. We had mast laying on the dock, ballast laying on the dock, engine laying on the dock. So those 6 weeks were a bit intense. And then we got our Coast Guard certified and got numerous awards for that. And she was one of the first SSVs that was certified in 1988, I think it was. Alyssa was a great ship, still is. I had the privilege of sailing her both as chief mate and master. She's a little bigger than Picton Castle. And then it was on to Picton Castle. No, it wasn't, not quite. Then I went in Niagara for a little while. Captain Walter Rydberg called me up, and I'd been consulting with them. I wasn't terribly interested in being her skipper. She's rather fragile and scary, and hitting the dock with her.
This is Niagara.
Niagara, yes, brig Niagara out of Erie, Pennsylvania. Captain Walter Rydberg, whom we've sailed on and off together over the years since Maverick. We were in Maverick together, Alyssa together, and he asked me to be chief mate. And we had this daunting. She had been technically, the build on her said she had to sail. The contract, the performance contract. So to meet that, they towed her to windward, let her go, and they set sails and sailed downwind. And so she sailed, but her rig was a horror show. But no one really knew that except for Walter and myself, and his task, and I was helping him, was to turn this into something resembling a going concern, which we did. But it meant I had to hire every Romance crew member I could find, because that's the way you get brig and brigantine sailors. And we included Captain Kimberly, had sold and gotten off the Romance by then, so we got him too. And we had it was an amazing experience. We sailed the first summer, again, no engine. We put in engines later, and then we eventually made a trip down the Erie Canal, put all the rig in trucks, and we took the bowsprit out too, because the bowsprit's too high. Motored down, didn't bump too much, and motored down the Chesapeake, down the Delaware Bay, and then up into where did we go? And then we have to go up into Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, yeah.
And we rigged her up there from zero in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after we got there, we're under sail with the gallant set.
Nice.
There was some long days. Later on, afterwards, the one that was my favorite restoration project was this Gerda 3. It's a Danish rescue boat. As the Nazis overran Europe in the 1940s, Denmark was overrun, but by 1943, there'd been a relatively soft hand because Hitler thought this would be the model protectorate. But by 1943, word came down they were going to do to Denmark Jews what they'd done in all the other countries. Word actually got downhill on purpose by some sympathetic Germans, and the Danish citizens got their rowboats out, their little fishing boats, and their little. She was a lighthouse tender, and they just got 7,500 Danish people over to Finland, over to Sweden. They actually only captured 400 Danish Jews, because the Danes figured these are Danes first and Jews second. And this is a wonderful story. I could spend the whole night on just this one. And I was sitting at the desk, and South Street Seaport guy calls up, says, "You know anything about wooden?" I just happened to be sitting at a friend's desk. You know, he just sort of launched, and "Do you know anything about wooden boats?" "Yes." "Do you know anything about Denmark?" "Yes." And well, come now, you gotta tell us how to do this, because they'd been given this boat. It was in Denmark, it was rotten. And I think it was given over martinis, and they were gonna fund a restoration in Denmark and then give it to the United States, which they did. And I ended up being the restoration director, design and facilitate that. And it was a wonderful project. I just loved the hell out of it. It was a great project and great little ship. Much longer story, but let's move on.
All right. I want to remind everybody we do have a Q&A running. If you do want to ask questions of Captain Moreland, type them in and we'll loop back towards the end.
I acquired, we bought the Picton Castle. I was looking for a ship. I looked at about 40 vessels, inspected about 11, I think. Picton Castle was the first one I saw. She was quite a bit bigger than I had in mind. I was looking for something Joseph Conrad size. Picton Castle's half again larger. She's the same size as the current Gazaela, George Stage, just under 300 tons. In the meantime, I bought her. We delivered her across to the States bought her with my last personal dime. Did some modest fundraising. We got across in filthy debt, and then I got a job with. We tied up at South Street Seaport, and then later on Kingston Maritime Museum. But in the meantime, I got a job with Moran Towing, which I found nice to get paid, and it was also a very interesting job. And this is one of I worked in all the harbor tugs, which is very interesting. But this is the Esther Moran, a 700-ton twin screw tugboat. We would take coal from Newport News to New England and Maine ports over. And I was there for about a year as we got our act together with Picton Castle to, get enough money together to do what we had to do. So next would be Picton Castle. Oh, I sailed Letty Howard. She was a smaller version of Ernestina, same designer, in fact. Wonderful schooner. And the Pioneer out of and Clearwater out of odd jobs, keep it all going. Rigged the AJ Meerwald. I don't have that in there. So these jobs sort of kept us afloat economically, and it allowed me to pay 2 deckhands and an engineer, because the money went straight through me. It wasn't much any money, but the rent was good. And South Street was a supporting place. Peter Neal let us stay there, and then we move into Picton Castle.
Now, this
Jumping
is a good
straight
place to
ahead.
talk a little bit about your program.
Okay, well, the program, she's a conventional bark. Nothing unusual about her. The ship is the program. It's about the ship and the sea. So when you join the ship, you're going to learn how to stand watch. You can learn how to steer. You can learn the compass. You're going to learn the point system. You're going to learn 205 lines. You're going to learn how to haul braces. You're going to have as close as possible to the best part of the last grain race, as it were, or the good parts of 2 years before the mast, with better food and not much flogging. And that's the program. It's the ship and the sea. She's a complicated vessel of her era. She's not a staysail schooner. She's not she's a lot of maintenance, got a tar. The sails are canvas. We make them ourselves, as this image shows, on board. You spend a year on board, you're going to be something of a seaman.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of small boat handling. We set, these are stunsels being set. They're made on board by the crew, and they're getting set in this picture. A lot of small boat handling. I don't have a lot of pictures of that here, but nonetheless, it's lots of small boat handling in the ports that we go into, a critical thing. Looking down, the foremast.
Yeah.
Young woman splicing wire. She later went on to Maine Maritime Academy, just doing a Liverpool wire splice, and that would be something they would have a chance to do. Sail making, rigging, navigation, diesel mechanics, if with aptitude, warming parcel serving, lots of it. carpentry, lots of ship varnishing, oiling, tarring. The program is the ship in the sea. Working aloft on a square rigger safely.
Mhm.
There's only one way to do it safely, and that's safely. As they say, no accident is no accident.
What are the rings we're looking at, Dan?
Those are the stunsail iron rings. Those are for the stunsail booms that run.
Got it.
And they're getting the clue gasket on, and then they're going to be spiraling the end gasket there. Sailing out of we've done 8 around the world voyages. We've done a number of trips to West Africa and the Caribbean, and we did one of my favorite voyages. It was a circuit of the Atlantic, where we went from Nova Scotia to Ireland, England, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, France, Norway, Portugal, and Spain, and then down the coast to Gibraltar and Morocco, Canary Islands, Cape Verde Islands, Senegal, Dakar, and then across to the Caribbean. Very, very amazing voyage. This is sailing out of Stavanger, Norway. So, and sometimes we catch a fish.
That's a picture.
That's a big fish. Our cook on the right in the back, that's Donald Church. He's been with us 17, 18 years. Fantastic shipmate and cook, and very excited about catching a fish. I think that's probably the biggest fish we ever caught. And that on the left is Erin. She's currently chief mate of the Blue Nose. She's Canadian, and to her over left shoulder is Joe. He is from Fiji. And I can't see who's in the black hat. And the other fellow, young guy there, he's from Bermuda. He's working on a research vessel out of Bermuda now.
Yeah.
I'd say a third of our trainees go on to sort of vocational positions.
Well, you've got crew from all over the world, don't you?
Yeah, well, indeed. We're staffed. We had one voyage with 15 different nations on board. I would have and the staff crew is international as well. This last time, Denmark, Germany, England, Bermuda.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at it, but yeah. And not the subject of this particular slideshow, but in the South Pacific and the Caribbean, we go to a lot of pretty places, and that's Vanuatu on the actually both are that's Asanvari and Vanuatu, a beautiful spot. And where that's not a set up picture, that's a dugout on the beach. That's how people get around. There isn't road to this village, and so that's how you get there. And those are reefs there. And then of course I sail with my Dawson. That's my son. He's 12 now, but he grew up on board. Pretty salty guy, and my wife, who has made 4 round the world voyages and is my has been my last voyage. She's purser, but she's also the in harbor, tight quarters helmsman, and he's a lot taller.
Nice to have someone you can trust.
Well, we have the connection, and she knows intuitively what I'm going to do, even though she does follow my orders, but she's not. She knows what I'm going to do, and that's good.
Yeah.
Been a great shipmate. This is Picton Castle in dry dock in Fiji. It's a very good dry dock, actually, but it just gives you a little sense of the scale of things. She's not small. I mean, again, this is the slideshow isn't all about the world voyage per se, but this is after 24 days from Galapagos. We're getting close to Pitcairn Island, which is the home of the descendants of the Bowdy mutineers, and I've been going there since 1975. Got pretty close connections, and we have just a grand time when we're there. It's a terrible anchorage, if it's an anchorage at all. Sometimes we unload supplies in different places throughout there and the South Pacific, and we do a yard and tackle rig, and the crew learn how to handle cargo with. There's a rig called the yard and stay rig on merchant ships, break bulk merchant ships. Well, this is the yard and stay rig. You use a yard and a stay, so. The crew get good at this, and they don't even know they're getting good at it. So that's part of the program. Yeah. You ask about program. Mrs. Johnson, actually Johnson was aboard one time. We were having lunch. We had corresponded a great deal, and I remember I asked her the question. I was always Captain Moreland. She was always Mrs. Johnson, and I asked her, Mrs. Johnson, do you ever get asked the question of what your program is? Because that's a word we use a lot. And then she said, Captain Moreland, Irving and I just thought we were too busy to have a program. So there's sort of some steel under that velvet. And But yeah, I mean, the Yankee was about the ship. We're about the ship. We're also about the islands and the cultures, and we get into them as well.
Yeah.
To a good degree, and we try to introduce and steer, and usually successfully, the crew over to seeing the place in a real way that we go to, not just the. And one great pleasure was to anchor with the Denmark in a Caribbean island. We'd been in touch. They had some extra time. He wanted to anchor in a place that was not full of bright lights and noises, that the crew could do their small boat work. So we agreed upon a spot, and we said, we'll meet you there. And so we anchored there for 3 or 4 days together. They had receptions for us. We had receptions for them, and very different styles. I mean, they're quite formal with uniforms, but there's a lot of overlap between how we do things. The seamanship's the same.
Those rigs look pretty similar.
Well, interesting. Yeah, when I saw the picture, I didn't use the Denmark as a prototype for the rig, but you look at these rigs and you realize there's a lot of shared DNA there. I based the rig on the George stage and the Belle of Lagos, because what I did was I tried to I found a 200 to 300 ton bark with the similar hull dimensions, and then said, let's adapt that rig because it obviously worked. Then I had it over, I ran it past a naval architect, marine engineer for stability. I want to do a third party. So our rig is actually modest. It could be taller, but I like it the way it is. And here we're just sailing along we have an old fashioned anchor on port and a stockless on starboard. But it was fun to be at anchorage with the Denmark one time.
Not bad.
And there she is. This is in the Timor Sea, headed towards Bali. That's north of Australia. Got to have your sunset shot.
The money is.
And then in Lüneburg, we've got a little tiny schooner, 26 foot long, the mighty Calanova, built in 1987. And we use her, Tammy's in my schooner, but we use her at bosun school. We'll get her going next summer. She's never been beaten by the Blue Nose. We have to point that out. If we're really being honest, we also point out she's never raced the boat. But,
this is a pilot boarding situation.
Right. Yeah, you're good. Now, this is a video. I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, it's not, but where they're getting off, they just dropped them.
Anyway, in the video, they're rounding up and someone's jumping off into the end of the pier as if they're boarding a schooner or boarding a ship as a pilot schooner. Well, this is pretty much Picton Castle looked like when I got her. She was in fact painted blue. She looked a lot worse, quite frankly. She was a little steamship, and originally her pilot house was more midships. This got converted, I think, in the mid-60s when she was converted to cargo from fishing. And she fished until 1939, conscripted into the Royal Navy, became a minesweeper, got blown out of the water once, completely apparently. I think she's a little bent. And then I got her, found her in 91, bought her in 93, delivered her, got her to New England in 94. We got her to Nova Scotia in 96 and started the conversion work, which included a whole lot. This is the clipper bow going on. That's a careful job. Bunks, accommodations. We entirely epoxy painted the interior of the vessel. Lots of steel work, lots of woodwork. The mast just getting done. It's the one thing I actually didn't make blueprints for. Most everything else was chalk marks, but this was actually specific blueprints. Again, following Germanischer Lloyd's. The soon-to-be auxiliary Barque Picton Castle still has her pilot chart house on, and we're maneuvering around Lüneburg Harbor. It was a great place to do the job in 1996, 97. What's next? And then there she is anchored off Pitcairn, not that many years later, 2 years later. She's been a fantastic seaboat for me. This is Pitcairn Island with the launching of the longboats. And that's Bounty Bay on a good day. Hey, Warren.
That was so smooth.
There's Andrew Christian. Kenneth Christian. Who else do we have here? That's our crew.
Watching those waves break over the side there.
Yeah, that's considered not a bad day at Bounty Bay. This is in
Really?
the 1970s. Your speaker right now is that guy standing to the right of the guy with the blue patterned shirt, and I'm in the filthy white shirt. Yeah, that would be me. I had hair in my head then. People talk about the places changing, and I said they've changed much, but I think I've changed more. So that was our last pulling boat. We in the Romance days, we went from Pitcairn to Henderson to collect mirror wood, and that's a story in itself. Yeah. And still good friends. And this is the same old guy, now an old guy off Pitcairn recently, and talking to Jay Warren, who's in the other picture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of fun. They've got big, powerful aluminum launches now, but they used to build the wooden boats on the island themselves. This is I don't know if this works as a video anymore, but this is Lunenburg Harbor in 1939. It's sort of fun. Let's take a look at it if we can. And this is our home. It's my home now, and it's where we did Picton Castle, and it's east of Maine more than it is north. People think it's far north. No, it's actually warmer here than Maine in the winter. And that's a little Tancook schooner, much like Calanova, sailing in the waters. You just saw Calanova, and she was designed and built in Tancook nearby for carrying cabbages and potatoes back and forth. George Stedell copied the lines of that and became a famous yacht designer, but his schooners are basically on Tancook lines. But this is 1939 Lunenburg waterfront. It looks much the same, and when we have a lot of schooners in, it looks very much the same. In 2005, we had a minor insurrection to keep the waterfront a working waterfront, and that's another story. There's a website on that. And, successful so far. Those buildings are there. The dory shop is still there. We build dories still. Masted schooner. Notice they're all bow out. So we do the same thing. Captain Henry Kohler of the Vima said, young man, in the wintertime, put the bow out, put an anchor out, because it could get rough here sometimes. So we've always done that. But the buildings are all still there. The docks are still there. The schooners, however, have moved on.
Some remarkable photos.
I first came to Lunenburg in 1983 when I was doing research for the Ernestina. And I found, and after doing, they made a lot of fittings for Ernestina as well. And, you know, by the time my Ernestina time was up, I realized I knew as many people in Lunenburg as I did in New Bedford. And I think, well, if I ever do my own ship, I'll do it here in Lunenburg. And that's how Picton Castle got to Lunenburg. It's a nice free harbor. A lot of good work can get done here. And that was certainly true in 1986, 87, and it's still true. They get paid by shares for catching fish, not for painting.
Yeah.
Salt cod.
Yeah.
Must be on a cigarette break because they're supposed to be unloading that stuff. We have one big fishing vessel out of Lunenburg now. There's still a lot of lobster boats. The Highliner is the Nellie Rowe under Captain Gail Atkins, and then there's the Maud Adams, which is the same dock we're on right now, is still fishing a scallop fishing. But big pelagic fishing seems to be not coming back anytime soon. And a lot more labor involved now. It's all sort of, it's a factory trawler, so it's a little bit less dangerous and odious work. So the fishing schooners would salt them at first at sea, and then they take them off in dories and just rinse them off, the salt off, and then salt them again and dry them out in the sun. But that's the pitching schooners. That's what Ernestina used to do as Effie Morrissey. And that's very much in the end. That's my wonderful Calanova, painted up as a little fishing schooner should be. And a joy to sail around.
Yar vessel.
Bosun School led into Bosun School. It's a land-based skills development thing we do ashore. It's a complement to the STCW basic safety training, where basic safety training, firefighting, man overboard, and life rafts. Those are all things you want to know how to do when bad things have happened. Seamanship is what we teach in order that bad things don't happen as often. So here it's on shower. We do a lot of small boat handling, hours a day if we can. Instruction, practice in rigging, sailmaking, carpentry, boat repair, fiberglass, things we don't even like. How to move heavy objects, topmast up and down, yards up and down, just moving heavy, junky things here and there. And how to work together and get along and like it. And the graduates of Bosun School, they always do well on their next ship. So I'm very proud of that, and I love that. This too is a video, I think.
Let's go sailing. Well, that was a sight, wasn't it? My goodness.
That was made by Liam Taylor, who was crew on our 5th voyage, but also joined us down here in the Caribbean this last voyage. We're gearing up for our next voyage, which will be under the command of Captain Dirk Lorenzen, who has been on the ship 10 years, been skipper over to the Great Lakes, be an outstanding captain for the ship. And it's from here to the Caribbean, to the Panama Canal, out Galapagos, Pitcairn Island, French Polynesia, Tahiti, Moorea, Bora Bora, Huahine, these places, and then head south to Raiavai, and then to an eastbound passage around the Horn, much like the little Joseph Conrad did, although a much more powerful vessel, into St. Helena, and then cross the equator again to the Caribbean, a lot of time in the Caribbean, and back to our dock in Lunenburg, and to dry our sails once again.
Well, Dan, that was an amazing production. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time you spent with us. We've gone over an hour, but I would love to keep you on if that's okay. You've got some questions on here. And looks like Dano Quinn asks, also listening out here on the West Coast and enjoying this. Never knew Dan's early beginnings. Guess they thought you were born on the mast.
Oh, Dan Quinn's a great skipper.
Yeah. U.S. Eagle, it says, war reparations from World War II. I understand she has sister ships.
Picton Castle had 4 sister ships, none of which exist today.
I'll be darned. How about that? David Porter, when you arrive at port with one of these vessels with sail only, how do you maneuver to the dock? I'm a sailor, but nothing bigger than 22 feet. David Porter, photographer.
Well, that's you could write, that's a book. The answer to that question is a book, but it depends on an awful lot on the port and what they used to do in the old days. Let's say New York, let's say East River, they'd sail right up to the river and they'd anchor in the river, or they get a tugboat. But if you did it without a tugboat, you could, if you're really lucky, you could move over alongside. But what they did commonly was anchor close to the dock and at slack water, get a rope and warp her in with, capstans and whatnot. But there's a lot of different answers to that question. And in some cases, like these big steel ships like the Mashulu, they were absolutely dependent on tugboats. They could not exist without them. And if you look at the age of exploration under sail, they were all ships the size of Picton Castle or smaller. The Cook's ships and the Bounty was half the size of Picton Castle. Cook's ships, same thing. They were very small. And they also had very different anchoring gear, which was more suitable for deeper water. It's a million factors. And of course, they had to be trained up to it and have no choice. Those are also factors. We try to sail, we sail as much as we can. And I find it just an excellent part of, I tell the crew when we're going to the Caribbean or at the end of a long voyage, it says, look, you can get stupid in the pubs ashore or you can sail the ship. And as long as you return to the ship in usable condition, we'll sail every inch. If this is going to be an agreement between us, if you want to be jerks, so far they haven't been. But we are going to sail the ship. Now, nothing easier than firing up and pushing an hydraulic button, someone gets the anchor up, but then what are we doing? That's not what we're doing. So sail the ship.
I've got one from Mark Stewart here. It says, how was your brother John as a celebrity crew member?
My brother John loved being on board. He'd been on several times. He was a very easygoing shipmate. I also wanted to add one of the great shipmates I had was Edgar Crocker, who helped put the funding together. Ship. He was a North Shore Bostonian, lived in my old part of the world, and I met him, and he was instrumental, and his family was instrumental in getting the, no one does anything by themselves. And he sailed with us for months and months out in the South Pacific. His grandson's with us now. And he was in a schooner on the coast of Newfoundland in the 1940s or something. And this was something he believed in as a life experience, but it wouldn't have happened without him. I didn't really get into the reconstruction period, but he's essential to that.
That's a great shout out. Scott Jackson asks you, thanks for your time tonight, Cap. Looking at maritime training and bringing new generations into the maritime workforce, do you see sail training as still a viable option? Working in the commercial sector since 1992, I see an aging workforce and not many young mariners entering or coming up. How can we sustain the sail training vessels we have now to allow an alternative for hawse pipers?
Well, that brings up a very interesting point. I'm glad that question got asked, because as we talk about sail training today, it's become a little fuzzy. It's sort of youth experience, and it makes you feel good about yourself because you've earned it. But sail training prior to the current epoch, let's say before the 1960s, was designed for one thing and one thing only. Sail training, to be trained under sail, had only one purpose, and that was to create officers and crew for steamships. That's its own purpose. Between the middle of the 19th century and the middle of the 20th century, there were over 202 large tonnage American flag sail training ships. 202.
Wow.
Yeah. And their purpose, again, was to create seamen, not for sailing ships. That was irrelevant. Sailing ships had no problem creating seamen. That's what they do. But to create it for steamships. And that's because it had its advent in the navies as well as the commercial forces. And the original big sail training ships were built or converted by shipping companies who saw it as a cost-effective way to keep their costs down, because they found that their officers, had they been trained under sail, they were just bloody better. They had much better situational awareness. Things tended not to break. They watched the weather better. They didn't drag as much. Just things were, and shipping companies, including sailing ships of that era, they're about profit. They weren't party time. And so, but many, particularly British and some American companies, Danish companies, established sail training ships for the express purpose of training their own staff at considerable expense. The East Asiatic Company had a huge five-masted bark called the Copenhagen. They built on their own dime. And she was an auxiliary. She had radio and watertight bulkheads, did carry cargo, probably maybe broke even, who knows. But they saw it as a way, then they knew what they had for crew. Yeah. And Joseph Conrad speaks about it in his various, sort of alludes to it. So that's just as valuable now as it was then, because it makes better seamen. And now I'm not trying to rain on the parade of people that don't have that experience. World War II broke that. It was a consistent program throughout the maritime nations, but World War II changed that because they needed third mates, chief mates, captains now, not in 5 years. So third mates were chief mates, second mates were captains. Captains were fleet captains. Everyone got moved up, shoved up the line, and it worked reasonably well for 4 or 5 years of World War II, and the chain of experience got broken. So how do we do it? Well, I get the question all the time, well, geez, what do I need to know how to sail for? No, you don't need to know how to sail. But the things that you learn while you're learning how to sail a substantial vessel, it doesn't have to be square rig, are critical factors in being a safe mariner. It's what bosun school's all about. Learning how to use a fire extinguisher is good. It's also really good to know how not to have a fire. So forth and so on. It's sort of like, seat belts. I mean, you want seat belts, but seat belts aren't safe driving. If you're jammed against your airbag in your seatbelt, good driving's over. Something bad happened.
Loud and clear.
You want that fail safe. So I think that that's a very important question. I strongly applaud it. But 4 months, you don't have to become a master mariner under sail, but 4 or 5 months seafaring training under a well-run sailing ship makes better commercial crew for tugboats or tankers or whatever.
Now, Gerhardus Osthorn asks, under what classification society are you inspected? Does the same society award sea time and certificates? If not, how is that done?
We are certified under the Cook Islands Department of Marine Transportation, Maritime Cook Islands. They don't issue their own certificates. You get your certificates from your own personal flag state, but we do issue sea time letters, and we do issue explanatory evaluations of that sea time. But if you're Danish, you get your certificates. You can get them from Holland too. You can get them from, but you get them from your home. Like if you're American, you get American certificates. You're Canadian, you get Canadian certificates. So the Cook Islands is thinking about developing their own thing, but they don't see any real point to it. But it's a severe register. We're the senior ship in the registry because the organization got formed after we were a Cook Island ship. But it's a solid registry.
Well done. Philip Rutherton writes, hello, Captain Moreland. Thank you for the history. Do you know whatever happened to the John Paul Jones?
Phil Brotherton. Hi, Phil. How you doing? Long time no see. I believe she's still around. The Montgomerys sold her in the 1980s, I think, but I believe she's still around. I don't happen to know, but I believe she's still around in Long Island Sound or somewhere.
All right, cool.
I don't know the answer to that.
Shelley Assett asks, do you have thoughts on preserving the history of modern tall ship training?
Modern tall ship training.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Preserving the history. Do I have thoughts? I have thoughts on preserving the training, keeping it going, refining it, and understanding what it really is. It's there's nothing wrong with the character building, delightful things that, like, these 2-week trips do that can have a big impact on a young person's life. And I applaud those programs and the shorter ones. We're at the other end of the scale. I think that you can have a great, solid seafaring sort of call it vocational training in 4 to 6 months. You can't do it in much less than 4 months, but 6 months. You don't need to sail for a year, but 6 months will get you there on a properly run ship. The history thereof, that's an interesting question that I don't really have an answer for, but the act of, yes.
Good. Julius Brito asks, did you get the puzzle we sent you? Signed, Sandra Brito.
Julius, thank you. A dear comrade from Ernestina days, a fantastic gentleman, and it just arrived yesterday. So set up a thank you letters in the mail, but they took an image of the Picton Castle at the dock in Lunenburg and made a 1,004-piece puzzle out of which my son is going to go nuts making. So, but yes, absolutely, I couldn't be more charmed and enchanted. Julius is one of the stalwarts of what made my many years with Ernestina so irreplaceably joyful and enriching in ways that cannot be done today. It's done. It's over. I mean, not done. I mean, the great vessel, but The people that were alive then. One day sail, we had members of every family that had anything to do with her on board. I had the Morrissey family, I had the Mendes family, I had Bartlett family, and you can't do that anymore. So that was so cool. It's priceless experience that I had.
Oh, I see that Jochen Hoffman asks, you have mentioned the Yankee plus Irving and X.C. Johnson. When and where did you have interaction with them?
Well, like many people, I mean, growing up in the 60s on schooner, this type of thing, I mean, certainly the Johnsons reigned supreme and still do. They were pioneers in this sort of thing. It was actually a very common thing to do in 20s and 30s. A lot of people bought an old schooner because, the world was falling apart. Let's buy an old boat. They're giving them away back then. You could get a good vessel, and lots of people did it. Very few people did it more than once. Johnson's made a way of life out of it, did a fantastic job. And Exie was a crackerjack sailor as much as, in my opinion, as Captain Irving was. I knew Exie better than Irving because because he died, I guess.
Yeah.
But I never sailed in the Yankee. I saw her in Ecuador one time, Salinas, Ecuador. Pretty sure it was her as a kid. But no, I never sailed in the Yankee. But certainly they were legends in our collective lifetimes.
Yes, for sure.
And deservedly so.
Julius writes to you, what a wonderful presentation.
Well, thank you, Julius.
Brooks Fraser, hey, Dan.
Hey, Brooks.
In sunsets around the world, have you ever witnessed the elusive green flash?
I get this question a lot. Some people are skeptical. I've seen it many, many times. Yes, absolutely. Green flash many times. The answer is 100% yes. I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen the green flash. You need high pressure, you need a clear horizon, and it has to be tropical and no clouds. But yes, I've seen the green flash plenty of times.
Jochen writes again, P.S. The Brigantines, Irving and X.C. Johnson, are still going strong out of San Pedro, California. Brooks Fraser says, is it a real thing? I don't know what that means.
Green flashes are real.
Oh, that's where he's going with that. Okay, good. And looks like anonymous attendee says, do you have an age limit for your crew?
Well, I think I'm getting past it myself. We don't, but you have to be fit and sort of pretty alert to what's going on. You don't have to be Superman.
Yeah.
You have to be generally pretty fit, but we don't tack an age onto that. Although we've had some pretty successful 65 and 70-year-olds that did very well.
Mm-hmm.
Their oldest was a 73-year-old former master mariner. He was a cupcake on board. Yeah.
Do you have a minimum age for your crew?
Pardon?
Do you have a minimum age for your crew?
18 with exceptions.
Okay.
The reason for that is, we don't wrap them in cotton wool in port. We don't bubble wrap them. They're on, we're on watches in port, but they're free to do it as they wish. And so we need people that have reached a certain level of they have to be 18. We have made exceptions. Yeah. We have made exceptions.
Brooks Fraser says, super time listening to you. Diane Schuldowski says, so inspiring from a former Sea Scout in Connecticut. And let's see.
I was a Sea Scout too. It was great for me. We had a lot of fun, did some nutty stuff that I'm surprised we survived, but we did.
Here we are. Do you still have a tattoo policy? Get a tattoo and get to take off work?
We don't have a tattoo policy.
Okay.
Either for or against. We do talk about them a little bit because you get into sort of tattoo fever out in the Pacific. There's some beautiful tattoo artists and everyone's getting them. Just easy does it. That'll be there a long time.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, just I'm not going to try to stop you, but mostly they've been good. Sometimes they're a bit, oh my God, you put that on your skin? Okay, well.
Yeah. But Jimmy Buffett once said it's a permanent reminder of a temporary feeling. Dan Parrott says, you are one of a kind. Cheers. And my friend and ours, Nancy Richardson.
Oh, good. Well, thank you, Dan.
Dan is one of the key leaders in the history of evolution of tall ships. He was captain of Ernestina when I was getting my Girl Scout mariners sailing every year. Still want to get to Pitcairn. Any advice, says Nancy?
Yeah, well, jump on in Panama or Galapagos on our next trip, and we go from there to Pitcairn.
I can't imagine anybody I'd rather sail with. Let's see now. Thank you, Captain Moreland, says Aaron Carpenter, my first captain.
Uh-huh.
And Jack McRae, this has been a fantastic podcast. I've been involved with the sail training on Lake Ontario. I found that one of our biggest challenges is teaching real sail training with so many Transport Canada requirements. Seems to be working against us.
Well, that's a whole nother chapter, which I probably don't want to go into right now.
Totally good.
Yeah.
And Brooke's favorite, excuse me.
But I may interrupt, but if you want to get in touch with me personally, you know how to do that, and we can talk.
Perfect. Brooks Fraser ends the question saying, provide some hints on how we can help you populate your bosun school.
Well, I don't know. Get the word out. We're going to do another session next summer. It's problematic in some sense because the people that really want and need it the most, we can't charge what it costs. So we need, basically scholarships are a very big thing, and I want to be growing a scholarship fund for that because people who can afford it are not necessarily people that are going to use it. And also I think I want to grow an adult version of it because that's kind of neat, but but that's a good question. And it's about access, and I want to work on developing so we don't have to have Picton Castle here while I'm doing it. The ship's a great laboratory. You got bunks, you have galley, you got a bark to work on, and the crew have done a wonder. This last gang has had a grand time doing it, but I can't tell the ship to stay here while we do that. She has to leave.
I hear that.
It's necessary to navigate.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you very much for the time. I can see you're getting a little uncomfortable, and
fine.
We've done a terrific thing tonight talking about these great ships, and specifically Picton Castle. Thank you for your time. For everybody who's listening, this podcast will be available on both the American Schooner Association website, amschooner.org, and also on the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race website, GCBSR. And I have a pretty good feeling there's probably going to be a link up at Picton Castle too.
Sure. Well, thank you, Duncan, and everybody that watched. I appreciate it, and it's an honor. So thank you.
You're very kind. Well, let's close it out. Thank you, Dan. Everybody have a really nice evening, and we hope to see you at the next one. Here we go.